Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the sources you need, the articles, the research, the collected wisdom, and distill them into clear, actionable knowledge.
And today, we are taking a frankly fascinating dive into something that governs so much of the business world.
We're looking at the fundamental, unchanging rules of the marketplace. We are digging into the 22 immutable laws of marketing.
Our mission today is really about clarity. It's about finding those aha moments, the truths that are so often counterintuitive, but absolutely non-negotiable.
And they have to be non-negotiable because the sources we've looked at reveal this staggering reality. Billions, with a B, are wasted every single year in marketing programs.
Programs that are, and this is the crazy part, they're practically designed to fail from the start.
Right, because they just ignore these bedrock laws.
Exactly.
And it's not just, small companies making rookie mistakes. We're talking about massive corporate incompetence. These are strategic blunders from the very organizations that are supposed to have the best and brightest.
And if you can understand why the giants fumble, well, that gives you a huge strategic advantage.
So where do we start? What's the core flawed thinking here?
Well, we have to tackle the flawed assumption head on. Most marketing failures, they aren't about a bad commercial or, a small budget.
Okay.
They're based on fundamentally faulty strategic assumptions. I mean, you look at the titans IBM, General Motors, Sears, Roebuck. These companies had almost unlimited resources.
Yeah, they had everything going for them.
And yet, they made these core strategic mistakes that were rooted in just ignoring the basic physics of the market.
General Motors is probably the most chilling example the sources give us because the failure is so quantifiable. It's not abstract.
Not at all. For decades, GM systematically, almost deliberately, dismantled the identity of its core brands. Chevy, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick.
They all started to look the same.
They blurred all the lines, the vehicles looked alike, they were priced alike, and they completely destroyed any unique position in the mind of the consumer. It was corporate cannibalization by design.
And the consequence wasn't just like soft sales.
It was a catastrophic financial hemorrhage. GM lost 10 share points in the market. Now that translates to an estimated $10 billion a year in lost sales.
$10 billion a year.
A year. And this wasn't a failure of manufacturing quality or, labor costs. This was a marketing failure so profound it basically redefined corporate waste.
And that failure, it leads right to the central premise we're exploring today. It's like physics, right? Gravity dictates if a plane flies. In architecture, structural integrity determines if a building stands. Marketing has its own immutable laws.
You can't negotiate with gravity.
And you can't negotiate with the consumer's mind.
Exactly. But the conventional wisdom in marketing so often operates on, a belief system rooted in arrogance.
What do you mean?
The belief is that if you just apply enough creative energy or enough determination or just sheer financial weight, you can overcome any market reality. It's the great lie. That effort can just negate these fundamental laws.
Ries and Jack Trout, the authors who distilled these laws, they didn't really invent them, did they?
No, they discovered them after 25 years of observing successes and, more importantly, failures across every major industry.
And they realized there are only 22 of these fundamental truths.
And we're going to unpack the most critical ones, starting with, I think, the biggest mind shift required.
Which is?
The battlefield is not the marketplace.
Okay, so that's our section 1 focus, the battlefield of the mind.
Right. And if there is one singular misconception that guarantees failure, it is the belief that marketing is a battle of products.
It seems so logical, though. Make a better product, you win.
It's what we want to believe. Companies spend untold fortunes perfecting their product-adding features, increasing specs, dropping costs, all based on this idea that the objectively superior product will, win in the long run.
It gives engineers and R&D teams hope. If we just work harder, we'll win. But you're saying the law of perception just overrides all of that.
The law of perception states it unequivocally. Marketing is a battle of perceptions. The sources are brutal and clear on this. There is no objective reality in marketing.
None that matters anywhere.
Right. All that exists are perceptions in the minds of your customers. And that perception is the reality.
That's a staggering claim. It implies that billions spent on improving objective quality might be fundamentally wasted if the perception is managed poorly.
It's the ultimate paradox. I mean, think back to the new Coke debacle in 1985.
The classic case study.
The Coca-Cola company had overwhelming scientific evidence. They did 200,000 internal taste tests. They proved New Coke tasted better than Pepsi.
And even better than their own original formula.
Even better than Coca-Cola Classic. So, objectively, New Coke was the superior, better-tasting product.
But the outcome was a historical disaster.
A complete disaster. New Coke failed miserably, while Coca-Cola Classic, the formula that was scientifically inferior by their own R&D, won the war. It eventually regained the top spot. Because the battle was never about sugar or flavor. It was about the perception of the real thing, of nostalgia, of Americana. Consumers literally twisted their own personal experience, their taste buds, to align with the perception they already held.
So, if I perceive Japanese cars as reliable and my new Toyota has a problem, I just blame bad luck.
Exactly.
But if I perceive American cars as unreliable and my new Ford runs perfectly, I see it as, what, an exception to the rule.
That's the power of the pre-existing mental framework. It's the everybody knows principle in action.
Okay.
The sources detail the terrifying impact of this during the Audi unintended acceleration disaster in the late 80s.
Oh, I remember that.
A single 60-minute segment suggested Audi 5000s were spontaneously accelerating, causing crashes.
And what did the actual objective research show?
Every single independent expert, every government investigation, they failed to replicate the problem.
So it wasn't real.
They concluded it was almost certainly driver error, people hitting the accelerator instead of the brake. Objectively, the car was safe.
But that didn't matter.
Not one bit. The perception, fueled by media and fear, was enough to completely destroy the brand. Audi's U.S. sales plummeted from 60,000 cars in 1986 to just 12,000 in 1991.
Wow.
They lost $2 billion. And it took them decades to recover. That loss was caused entirely by perception, not a single mechanical failure.
That brings us directly to law number 1 then, the law of leadership. If the whole battle is in the mind, the easiest way to win is to just get there first.
It is the most fundamental law. It is better to be first than it is to be better.
Why is that?
Because once you're first, you own that mental position. Trying to dislodge a leader by claiming you have better quality or more features requires an exponential amount of money and effort just to overcome that deeply held perception.
The sources have that great historical anecdote. We all remember Charles Lindbergh, right? The first person to fly the Atlantic solo.
Of course.
But who was Burt Hinkler?
I have no idea.
The second person. Arguably a superior pilot, flew faster, used less fuel, but he's completely lost memory. Leadership is about ownership of that mental space.
And it's true across every industry. Hertz in rent-a-cars, IBM in mainframes, Coca-Cola and Cola, the leading brand is almost universally the one that got into the prospect's mind first.
And that advantage is sticky. It doesn't just fade away.
Not at all. Heineken was the first imported beer after World War II. And despite over 400 competing imported brands hitting the market since then, Heineken still holds 30% of the import market share.
Decades later.
Decades later. Just from being first, it creates an almost impenetrable barrier.
And this leads us to law number 3, which is a crucial modification of that, the law of the mind. It's better to be first in the mind than it is to be first in the marketplace.
This is critical, especially for tech and for rapidly changing categories.
Yeah.
Many companies have the first product, but they fail to secure that first mental position.
Like the MIT's Altair 8800.
Exactly. The world's first personal computer. Does anyone remember it?
Nope.
No. The mental space for personal computer was eventually captured by IBM's massive marketing and PR push, even though they arrived much later to the marketplace.
So once that mind is made up, once that category leader is set in stone, the consequences of trying to change it are severe.
Trying to change a deeply held perception, trying to convince a prospect that they were wrong about the leader they chose, is the single most wasteful activity in all of marketing.
Like Xerox.
Xerox spent 25 years and over $2 billion trying to change its perception from copiers to computers, and they failed completely. You can't just worm your way into a mind, you have to blast your way in, and that requires astronomical resources.
So if the existing category leader seems unbeatable and you can't blast your way in, what's the alternative?
That's law number 2, the law of the category.
Okay.
If you cannot be the first in an existing category, you have to create a new category that you can be first in. Instead of saying you have a better version of the leading product, you shift the frame entirely.
The historical analogy here is perfect too. Amelia Earhart, she wasn't the third person to fly the Atlantic solo.
No, she was the first woman.
Right. She shifted the category from solo pilot to female solo pilot and owned it.
And your corporate strategy should mirror this. DEC didn't fight IBM on mainframes. They created the mini-computer category. Dell didn't try to be better than Compaq in retail. They were the first to sell PCs by phone.
So you have to ask yourself, first what? Not how am I better?
Exactly. And when you launch, you have to promote the new category first, not just your brand.
Okay, so once you've established your position, first, second, third, in whatever category, your strategy has to change based on where you land. That's Law 7, the law of the ladder.
The law of the ladder acknowledges that the human mind is selective. It builds these ladders for product categories, and it ranks the brands it knows.
And it only accepts new information that's consistent with the rung you already occupy. The famous example here, and a critical piece of counterintuitive marketing, is the Avis story.
Oh, it's classic. Avis was losing money, hand over fist.
Yeah.
They were trying to convince customers they were the finest in rented cars. A clear violation of the law of perception because, everyone knew Hertz was number one.
So what did they do?
They only became massively profitable when they embraced their position. They shifted their slogan to that candid admission. Avis is only number 2. We try harder.
And that campaign worked because the customer already thought of Avis as number 2. The ad just confirmed their reality.
Which immediately granted Avis the positive perception of superior effort. It was brilliant.
But then they changed it.
They did. When ITT bought Avis, they tried to change the strategy to Avis is going to be number 1. Sales immediately collapsed. The mind just rejected the claim because it violated the established ladder.
And what's even more revealing is the quantifiable, almost mechanical relationship between those rungs on the ladder.
Yes. You're talking about the 4-to-1 ratio.
Exactly.
In mature categories, market share often settles into this 4-to-1 relationship based on mental position. The sources cite the high-end Japanese car market years ago. Acura, the first, the leader, sold roughly 143,000 units.
Okay.
Lexus, number 2, sold 71,000.
Half?
And Infiniti, number 3, sold 34,000.
Chillingly close to a 4-to-1 split. It implies that if you're third, you can work twice as hard and spend twice as much, but you'll still only sell half as much as number 2.
It just makes the fight for the number 1 or 2 position paramount. If you're not in the top 2 or 3, you're fighting for scraps.
Or you have to invoke the law of the category and just set up a new ladder entirely.
And you have to remember the rule of 7. The average human mind can't deal with more than 7 units in a category. If your brand is number 8, you might as well not even exist.
Moving into section 2, let's talk about achieving clarity. This has to be the ultimate goal for any successful brand. And it starts with law number 5, the law of focus, which demands what the authors call the ultimate sacrifice.
The law of focus is maybe the most powerful strategic tool there is, mostly because it's so difficult for corporate executives to actually implement.
Why is that?
Because the most powerful concept you can own is a single word in the prospect's mind. And to do that, you have to narrow your focus and sacrifice everything else.
And the power of that owned word is just. It's undeniable. Federal Express owns overnight.
Volvo owns safety. Domino's owns home delivery.
Even for commodity products. Heinz owns ketchup, but more specifically, they own slow.
Right, slowest ketchup in the West. When Prego entered the market against Ragu, they successfully claimed the word thicker. Owning a word creates a powerful halo effect. If Volvo owns safety, you immediately grant them credibility on related things like engineering and quality, even if that's not their primary focus.
And the sources give us a catastrophic illustration of what happens when a leader loses that focus. Atari,
back in the early 80s, literally owned the words video game in the mind of the consumer.
But the executives got worried. They thought video games were a fad.
So they tried to pivot.
They tried to pivot and diversify, attempting to redefine Atari as a computer company.
Which violated 2 laws right there. The law of the mind, trying to change a perception, and the law of focus, abandoning their word. Exactly. They abandoned their turf. They went off to chase a word that was already owned by Apple and IBM. And this created a massive vacuum in the mind.
And who stepped in?
Nintendo. A few years later, they arrived, claimed the abandoned video game concept, and secured 75% of a multi-billion-dollar market. Atari was decimated, simply because it lost its focus.
Which leads directly to law number 6, the law of exclusivity. 2 companies cannot own the same word.
It's worse than feudal. It's often counterproductive. Trying to dislodge a competitor's word frequently just reinforces their position.
Give me an example.
Federal Express, after establishing overnight, later decided to campaign to take Worldwide away from DHL Worldwide Express. This massive multi-million-dollar campaign did nothing but remind consumers that DHL was, in fact, the worldwide expert.
The same thing is happening in the battery war, isn't it? The Energizer Bunny is relentless, but it's trying to steal long-lasting from Duracell.
And it can't. Duracell was first to link their brand to that attribute. And even their name, Dura, suggests duration, longevity. Executives make this mistake after poor market research. They survey customers who say they want a long-lasting battery, and they think, great, we must advertise that.
But they fail to ask the crucial question.
Who already owns that idea in the mind?
So if you're stuck on the second rung and you can't copy the leader and you can't use their word, your strategy has to be opposition. That's Law 9, the law of the opposite.
If you are shooting for second place, your strategy is dictated by the leader. You can't afford to be similar. You have to leverage the leader's strength into a weakness. Don't try to be better, be different.
This means targeting two types of customers, the ones who buy the leader and the ones who don't. And you have to aggressively target that second group.
That is the Pepsi versus Coke playbook. Coca-Cola was 100 years old, established, traditional, those are their strengths.
Right.
Pepsi strategically flipped that into a weakness by positioning itself as the opposite, the Pepsi generation, the choice of the young modern crowd. They polarized the market. They gave the segment that resists the old guard a clear choice.
You mentioned the need for brutality here, but it has to be calculated brutality.
It has to be credible. Scope mouthwash, which tasted pleasant, attacked Listerine by hanging the label medicine breath on them.
Ouch.
And Tylenol, which launched when studies highlighted aspirin's negative side effect of stomach irritation, didn't say, we're better. They said, for the millions who should not take aspirin. They used the leader's inherent flaw to create a massive new category.
And the sources highlight Burger King's failure when they forgot this law.
Oh yeah, Burger King was wildly successful when they were the anti-McDonald's, have it your way.
Yeah.
Broiling, not frying. They attacked the leader's rigidity.
But then they got timid.
They got timid, and they tried to emulate McDonald's. They started chasing the kids market. They abandoned their identity as the alternative, and their sales declined rapidly. They lost their focus.
This leads us to Law 14, the law of attributes. For every strong attribute the leader owns, there's an opposite, effective attribute you can own.
This is how you differentiate. IBM owned big and powerful mainframes. DEC succeeded by owning the opposite, small, with mini computers. McDonald's owns the attribute of kids and play areas.
So if Burger King wants to get its mojo back, it has to choose an opposite attribute to own.
Absolutely. The opposite opportunity for Burger King is to position itself for the older crowd, maybe anyone over 10.
But to do that,
they have to invoke the law of sacrifice. They have to willingly give up the kiddie market entirely. By sacrificing the kids, they gain the focus they need to define McDonald's as Kiddieland, which is a powerful move for targeting adults. You cannot win by trying to be similar.
And often the quickest way to establish that difference and that credibility is by embracing candor. Law 15.
This is one of the most counterintuitive laws, and it runs completely against the corporate culture of positive spin. The law states, when you admit a negative, the prospect immediately grants you a positive.
A negative statement about yourself is instantly accepted as truth.
While positive claims are immediately viewed with skepticism, it's just human nature.
This is why the classic examples resonate so deeply. Avis is only number 2 in rent-a-cars. The negative is accepted because it aligns with perception, and the prospect grants the positive. They must try harder.
Or, with a name like Smucker's, it has to be good. Most companies would bury an awkward name, but Smucker's leaned into it. They acknowledged the negative to achieve the positive. They must be compensating with superior quality.
Even the 1970 VW campaign, the 1970 VW will stay ugly longer, set up the positive perception of superior reliability.
It did. And the Listerine response to the taste attacks from Scope is the masterful application of this law.
It's brilliant.
When Scope attacked the truly awful taste of Listerine, Listerine responded by running the slogan, "The taste you hate twice a day."
They just owned it.
They admitted the negative, "It tastes terrible," which instantly set up the undeniable positive. Because it tastes like disinfectant, it kills a lot of germs. The prospect makes the logical connection for you.
But there's a caveat.
The negative has to be widely perceived as true already, and you have to shift immediately to the positive demonstrable benefit.
Okay, now we transition into Section 3, which addresses the perils of prosperity. This is where success itself becomes the seed of failure. It starts with Law 18, the law of success.
Success is the ultimate destroyer of objective marketing. It often leads directly to arrogance, and arrogance leads to failure.
How so?
When an executive becomes successful, they inevitably substitute their own judgment for what the market is actually telling them. They stop listening to the market and start listening to their own ego.
The sources cite individuals like Donald Trump and Robert Maxwell as examples of people just blinded by their early wins.
And the core of that ego problem is the belief that the name is the reason for the success.
And that false belief that the brand name has this infinitely leverageable equity.
That leads directly to the cardinal sin of marketing. Law 12, line extension. The belief is, if our name works on this product, it must work on everything.
The decline of Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, is a perfect historical case of this ego blindness.
DEC was a massive $14 billion success story in mini computers. But the founder, Kenneth Olson, he was so entrenched in his own vision that he dismissed three major market trends: the PC, open systems, and RISC architecture as just fads.
He thought he knew better than the market.
His ego, believing his vision transcended market forces, led directly to the company's terminal decline. You cannot fight the tide.
So if success breeds arrogance, companies have to have a strategy for dealing with the inevitable consequence. Failure. That's Law 19, the law of failure.
Failure has to be expected, and it has to be accepted quickly. Instead, major corporations often compound their mistakes. They try to reorganize, or they throw massive resources at a project that has already failed in the consumer's mind.
IBM with copiers, Xerox with computers.
For years, they just stubbornly clung on.
And the sources draw an interesting contrast here between Western corporate culture and the Japanese consensus style.
That's right. In Japanese management, major decisions are often owned by a large group, which makes it easier to accept failure quickly because the corporate ego is removed. It's easier to say, "we were all wrong," than for one executive to admit, "I was wrong," which risks their entire career.
The personal agenda.
Exactly. Prioritizing career safety over the company's benefit. It's why so many executives limit risk-taking and avoid the bold, difficult moves that these laws demand.
This short-term thinking is also responsible for violating Law 11, the law of perspective. Marketing effects take place over an extended period of time.
This is a direct attack on quarterly reporting and short-term financial pressure. The short-term effect of a marketing action is often the exact opposite of its long-term impact.
The analogy they use is perfect.
Alcohol. It initially acts like a stimulant because it depresses your inhibitions, but chemically, it is a depressant. The long-term effect is the chemical reality.
And the most immediate example of this flawed perspective is the overuse of sales and discounts.
Oh yeah. Sales increase short-term volume. That's the immediate high. But the long-term depressing reality is that they educate your customers to avoid buying your product at regular prices. You create a customer base addicted to continuous dosing of discounts.
And once you start, you can't stop.
You can't, not without losing volume.
The beer industry provides the most painful, quantifiable illustration of how perspective and line extension intersect to just destroy a brand: the collapse of Miller High Life.
This data is critical. When Miller Lite was introduced to line extension, Miller High Life's regular sales actually tripled in the 5 years following Lite's launch. They hit a peak of 23.6 million barrels.
That's the short-term financial euphoria.
That's the high, but immediately after that peak, the long-term consequence kicked in. High Life declined for 13 years straight, bottoming out at 5.8 million barrels. The line extension ultimately cannibalized and destroyed the equity of the base brand. It spread the Miller name too thin.
And the same exact pattern doomed Michelob and Coors regular.
It did. And this sets the stage for Law 12, the law of line extension, which you called the cardinal sin of marketing and the most violated law of all.
It seems to be.
The pressure to extend the equity of a successful brand is just irresistible. It happens almost unconsciously, like a closet filling up with junk. It's seductive because it seems rational in the boardroom.
We already have awareness. Let's leverage the name and minimize marketing costs.
And the result is always more is less. The sources cite the catastrophic spread of IBM. IBM was highly profitable when it focused tightly on mainframes. But by 1991, they had line extended into everything: PCs, workstations, software, networks, printers.
Trying to be all things to all people.
And that year, they lost $2.8 billion. They diffused their focus, and critically, they confused the consumer's mind.
And the authors point to Microsoft potentially falling into that same next IBM trap.
Microsoft, the leader in PC operating systems, started aggressively chasing dominance in every software category: word processors, spreadsheets, graphics programs. They're pursuing this all-encompassing vision, which historically is a recipe for disaster. It dilutes the single word you own in the mind.
The failure of A1 poultry sauce is the perfect illustration of how logic fails against perception here.
The management logic was totally sound. A1 is a highly recognized brand name, so they thought they could just extend the brand name to a poultry sauce. But in the prospect's mind, A1 means steak sauce. It's not a generic brand identifier. You can spend $18 million, as they did, but the mind immediately rejects the concept. The perception is immutable.
So invariably, the leader in any category is the brand that is not line extended.
Gerber baby food. They maintain a tight focus, and they hold a dominant 72% market share over their line-extended rivals like Beechnet and Heinz.
So if line extension is the great sin, then the antidote is Law 13, the necessity of sacrifice. You have to give up something to get something.
This is the law of focus taken to its extreme, and it demands three core sacrifices: your product line, your target market, and constant change.
Let's unpack the first one, product line.
The sources are blunt. The full line is a luxury for a loser. You have to narrow your focus to gain power. Contrast Emery Air Freight, a generalist that handled everything, with Federal Express.
Right.
Federal Express sacrificed all those other market segments to focus solely on overnight small packages. That ruthless focus allowed them to achieve massive scale and profitability.
We see this in retail, too. Department stores selling everything struggle while specialists thrive.
The Gap, Victoria's Secret, Toys R Us. Toys R Us succeeded by sacrificing everything else to focus purely on toys.
The second sacrifice is the target market. This is where you give up the entire mass market to secure a specific position.
You don't have to appeal to everybody. You just have to focus on the ideal customer to set your perception. Pepsi sacrificed everything but the teenage market, the Pepsi generation, to successfully challenge Coke.
And look at Marlboro.
A perfect example. They were a minor women's brand until they made the bold move of sacrificing nearly all their existing customers to focus purely on the man's man, the cowboy.
The target was the cowboy, but the market became everyone.
Exactly. The target is not the market. By establishing that cowboy archetype, they became the largest selling cigarette among men and women because the positioning was so strong. They owned masculinity and independence, which resonates far beyond the actual target.
And finally, the third sacrifice. Constant change.
You have to sacrifice the temptation to constantly tweak and change your strategy. People Express, the early no-frills airline, failed when, after their initial success, they abandoned that position. They bought big planes, flew major routes, and tried to attract a wider demographic.
They lost their focus and identity.
They did. Now contrast them with White Castle, which has sold essentially the same frozen sliders for 60 years and remains highly profitable. Consistency in strategy, even if it feels static, is vital.
Okay. In our final section, let's look at the structure of the market itself and the external forces that impact these laws. We start with Law 8, the law of duality.
This is a long-term inevitability. In the long run, every market becomes a two-horse race.
So a category might start with a steep ladder of multiple rungs, but over time, it simplifies.
The smaller players are forced out or marginalized, leaving only two dominant forces.
Everini and Duracell, Kodak and Fuji, McDonald's and Burger King, it's unavoidable.
And the data for the fate of third place is just grim. In the Cola Wars in 1969, Coke had 60% share, Pepsi had 25%, and Royal Crown RC had 6%.
Okay.
Over time, Coke fell to 45%, Pepsi rose to 40%, and RC just shriveled to 3%. Once a market matures, that third position is unsustainable.
Which is why companies like GE under Jack Welch concentrated only on businesses where they could be number one or number two.
If you're third, you were simply spending money to reinforce the top two positions.
Related to this is Law 10, the law of division. Over time, a category will divide and become two or more categories, each with its own new leader.
And corporate leaders mistakenly fight this law. They often believe in the siren song of convergence or synergy, the idea that the market wants everything combined under one umbrella.
But the consumer mind prefers specialization.
Absolutely. The massive category of computers broke down into mainframes, minis, workstations, PCs, laptops, and now mobile devices. And each segment has a new leader because it demands a unique position in the mind.
And the sources cite Volkswagen's strategic error as the perfect violation of this law.
VW established the small car category with the Beetle. They dominated the imported market. But when they decided to go upmarket, they violated the law of division by using the same brand name, Volkswagen, for big, fast, and expensive cars.
The brand name that meant small and ugly in the consumer mind.
It was destroyed. VW's share plummeted from 67% to under 4%.
And their Japanese competitors got this absolutely right.
Yes. When Honda decided to launch a luxury car, they didn't call it the Honda something. They correctly launched a new brand, Acura, separating the new luxury perception entirely from the Honda perception of reliability and economy. They won 2 categories by respecting the law of division.
This structure leads us to Law 17, the law of unpredictability.
Unless you are writing your competitors' plans for them, you cannot predict the future. So many marketing problems stem from trying to create rigid, long-term plans based on unknowable futures.
Especially when driven by short-term financial thinking, like meeting quarterly reports.
Right. IBM's massive failure with Office Vision, a multi-year plan to hook up all PCs to mainframes, was doomed because it relied on static assumptions about the competition in technology.
As the source quotes about the failure at Gettysburg, I've always thought the Yankees had something to do with it. You can't plan in a vacuum.
The focus has to shift from rigid long-term plans to long-term direction. Domino's Pizza focused on the direction of building the first nationwide home delivery chain. You also have to identify and follow genuine trends, not fads.
Like the growing health orientation that led to healthy choice.
And market research, which is often hailed as the solution to unpredictability, fails completely with genuinely new ideas.
Why is that?
It's excellent at measuring the past, but it can't measure new revolutionary ideas because customers lack a frame of reference. The Xerox plain paper copier is the classic example. Research suggested no one would pay 5 cents for a plain paper copy when they could get a thermofax for $1.50.
But Xerox ignored the research.
They bet on a direction and created a multi-billion-dollar industry.
And often the press gives us completely misleading indicators of success, which is Law 20, the law of hype.
The situation is often the opposite of the way it appears in the press. When companies are genuinely successful, they are quiet. They don't need to shout about it.
It's when they're struggling or launching a questionable strategy that the massive hype machine kicks in.
New Coke failed, despite getting over $1 billion worth of free publicity. USA Today lost $800 million. The next computer, heavily hyped by Steve Jobs, found no sustainable market position.
So hype is a smokescreen.
Usually, yeah. It's designed to paper over a strategic weakness. Real revolutions, like the personal computer or the fax machine, sneak up quietly. The key is to ignore the front-page hype and look for the innocuous little stories in the back of the paper that signal genuine long-term trends.
So if planning is useless and predictability is an illusion, how does a company actually execute a successful move? That's Law 16, the law of singularity.
Success comes from the single, bold stroke. In any given situation, only one strategic move will produce substantial results. Trying harder, launching dozens of small initiatives. It's not the secret. It's about finding the line of least expectation.
The sources compare this to military strategy Hannibal over the Alps, D-Day at Normandy. It's the unexpected, focused move that leverages all your energy.
And the sources suggest the single bold move Coke should have made when it was locked in that two-front war with Classic and New Coke was to just drop New Coke entirely.
That's it.
That single move would remove the embarrassment and allow Coke to use the law of focus to bring back the concept of the real thing against Pepsi's youth positioning. It's the single focus strategy that uses their existing strength.
And the distinction between Law 21, the law of acceleration fads, versus trends is crucial here too.
A fad is a wave. High visibility, quick collapse, like the initial Cabbage Patch Kids boom. A trend is the tide. Almost invisible, but powerful over the long term, like the Barbie doll.
And the strategy for managing a fad is totally counterintuitive.
If you are faced with a fad, you have to dampen it to stretch it into a trend. Quaco aggressively over-merchandised Cabbage Patch Kids, causing the fad to peak and collapse quickly, which eventually led to their bankruptcy.
So you don't pour fuel on the fire.
You don't. Hasbro, when they acquired the brand, handled them conservatively, which allowed the product to endure as a stable, long-term entity. You maximize your long-term success by minimizing the short-term rush.
And finally, Law 22, the law of resources. The idea is secondary to the funding required to implement it.
Without adequate funding, the best idea in the world won't get off the ground. Marketing is fought in the mind, and you need money, serious money, to enter and maintain that position. The cost of admission is only going up. A single minute on the Super Bowl costs $1.5 million.
So for an entrepreneur, a mediocre idea with $1 million is generally better than a brilliant idea with none.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The current battle between the company that invented clumping cat litter, Scoop Away, and Golden Cat, which line extended its Tidy Cat brand, will ultimately be decided by money. Golden Cat, with far superior resources, will win the battle to drive the idea into the consumer's mind, even though they were second.
You simply cannot save your way to success in the marketing war.
No, you can't.
This has been a profoundly detailed exploration of how the best corporate intentions are so often defeated by these non-negotiable laws. We've seen countless examples of how money and effort are wasted when they fly in the face of this immutable market reality.
And we have to conclude by acknowledging the extreme difficulty of applying these laws inside an existing organization. The sources issue a warning that these laws fly directly in the face of corporate ego, conventional wisdom, and the internal reward structure that values short-term tinkering over long-term strategic sacrifice.
Management will resist these laws because they threaten deeply held beliefs. The law of perception fights the deep-seated faith in R&D and the better product.
The law of sacrifice fights the desire to offer everything to everyone, and the law of line extension fights the corporate belief in the leverage of brand equity, which is often treated like a sacred transferable asset.
Patience is required.
The laws themselves are immutable. Management is mutable. And by understanding these laws, you achieve the well-informed clarity that escapes, I'd say, 90% of organizations.
And that clarity is the ultimate payoff, the ultimate revenge.
So here is the provocative thought for you to mull over and explore. If you review the grade of marketing failures we discussed today, the massive line extensions, the attempts to fight the law of leadership, the erosion of focus, which current, seemingly safe corporate strategy, maybe in a booming industry like streaming or social media or electric vehicles, is already planting the seeds of its own unavoidable long-term failure.
Who is trying to own a word that is already taken?
Or who is attempting to be everything to everyone. Remember, the market will always divide, and the long run is always approaching.